Hey everyone, this is Rob with Code Academy. I'm a front-end developer based out of Seattle, Washington. In this video, we're going to look at the Learn JavaScript Syntax Lodash project. To complete this project, you'll need to be familiar with using conditionals to determine whether or not pieces of code can run, using built-in JavaScript functions to manipulate values and data, and iterating through objects with for-in loops. Let's get started. Alright, in this project, we're going to be recreating some of the functionality from the popular Lodash library, which has many methods that add new functionality to numbers, strings, objects, and arrays. Implementing these ourselves will be a great exercise in problem-solving skills, and also making sure that we understand how methods work. Now, for each method that we're going to implement, we're going to follow 4 steps. First, we're going to specify the functionality of the method we're implementing. We're going to state what we expect the functionality of the method to do. The second step is to ideate, to come up with a game plan. It's highly recommended during the ideate step that you use pseudocode and comments to think through how you're going to solve a problem. Then finally, in our implement step, we'll code out one of the possible solutions to the problem. And then our final step for each method will be to test our code to make sure that it works. We're going to encourage you to work on the ideate and implement steps on your own before consulting our approach, as it'll really help you develop problem-solving skills on your own. Now, once you come up with a solution, don't be surprised if it differs than ours. There's many approaches that we can take to solve a problem in programming, and ours is merely one of them. Okay, so with all that said, let's get started implementing some awesome new functionality. Now in this first section, we're simply going to create a Lodash object. And if you do get stuck anywhere, you can simply open up a hint, which often gives you more information or some syntax that can help you if you're stuck. We're going to create a variable using the underscore symbol that will store our Lodash object. And we're going to initialize it to an empty object. Let's go ahead and mark step 1 as complete, and now move on to step 2. We're going to get some practice testing our code. And always remember, before we run our code, we want to make sure that we've saved the code that we've written. So let's go ahead and run it. node_.js. Now I'm going to go ahead and clear out my terminal, and now it's time to test our code. We can use a test directory that's been created, and you can go ahead and take a look. In this case, we're going to test the file lodash.js. It's not necessary for you to look through these tests, but they are there if you want to take a look at them. So to run our test, we're simply going to type node, test is our directory, and the name of our file is lodash.js. And when we run our code, we see that we have all greens, which means that we've passed. If there is something broken in our code, the feedback would be in red. So I'm going to clear the terminal, mark step 2 as complete, and let's move on to step 3. We're going to go ahead and implement the clamp method. Now in the specify step, we're going to make sure that we understand the functionality of the clamp method. You're free to check out the documentation as well. The clamp method is going to take 3 arguments. We're going to have a number, a lower bound, and an upper bound. And clamp is going to modify the provided number to be within the 2 provided bounds. So if the provided number is smaller than the lower bound, it's going to return the lower bound as a final number. If the number is larger than the upper bound, it's going to return the upper bound as a final number. And if the number is already within the 2 bounds, it's simply going to return that number. Now you could take a look at the hint for examples of how this might play out. This is our number, -12. It's smaller than -5, our lower bound. So we clamp to that -5 because that's the lowest that we can go. And so we return -5. In our next example, we have the number 8. 8 is larger than our lower bound, -5. And so now we look at the upper bound. 8 is larger than our upper bound, 6. And so we clamp it to our upper bound and we return 6. Then in our final example, we have a 5. 5 is greater than our lower bound, 3. And it's also less than our upper bound of 20. So that means we simply return the number 5. Okay, let's mark step 3 as complete. And in step 4, this is where you get to ideate. You get to think through a possible way you might implement a solution. And you'll want to be sure to use pseudocode and comments even if you don't know the exact code that you want to write. We provide you with some thoughts and some methods that we think you can use to accomplish this. Now let's go ahead and implement this together in step 5. In our Lodash object, we're going to go ahead and add our method, clamp. It's going to take 3 parameters, number, lower, and upper. And within our method, we're going to create a variable called lower clamped value. And it's going to be set to the value of calling math.max on our number and our lower value. So we're going to return the greater value of the two. If our number is -5, but our lower is 1, then math.max is going to return 1. And now we're going to create a variable, const clamped value, and we're going to set equal to math.min. Now at this point, we're going to return the lower value of our lower clamped value and the argument passed in to upper. So if our lower clamped value is 7, but our upper is 5, then this is going to return 5. So finally, let's just go ahead and return clamped value as our final value from the method. Let's mark step 5 as complete, save our code, and move on to step 6. We're going to test our code. And if you ever need to know what file you're going to test, you can go ahead and open up the hint. So node test clamp.js, and all greens. That means all of our tests are passing. Perfect. Let's go ahead and move on to our next method. We're going to look at the inRange method. Now in the specify step, we're going to look and see how the inRange method works. It's going to take 3 arguments, a number, a start value, and an end value. And it's going to check to see if the provided number falls within the range of the start and end values. If the number is smaller than the start value, then inRange will return false. If the number is larger than or equal to the end value, then inRange will return false as well. If the provided number is within the start and the end values, inRange will return true. We also have some code in here that's going to deal with some special scenarios. If no end value is provided, then the start value will be a value of 0, and the end value will be the provided start value. And if the provided start value is larger than the provided end value, then we're simply going to swap those two values. And our hint gives an example of how this might be. So for instance, if our number is -4, and then we have a start value of -1 and an end value of -6, well, -1 is greater than -6, so these two get swapped. -6 is our start value, and -1 is our end value. So -4 is greater than -6, and it's less than -1, so it's true. And again, in the ideate step, we walk you through a process of how you might go about solving this problem and some methods that might be helpful to you. We talk about how you might solve this problem, and so this is a good time to compare how we suggest solving the problem with how you might have thought through solving the problem. Let's go ahead and apply a solution in the implement step of step 9. Make sure to comma separate your values. So after clamp, we're going to add our method inRange. And this is going to take 3 parameters, number, start. The first thing we want to do is check and see if end is undefined. So we'll say if end is equal to undefined. In that case, we're going to go ahead and set end equal to start, and we'll set start equal to 0. And that's going to deal with the case in which end is not provided. Now we're going to create another if statement, and we're going to check whether start is bigger than end. So if start is greater than end, in this case we want to swap the two values. In the ideate step, we talked about how to swap two values without overriding each other using a temp variable. So we're going to go ahead and replicate that here. We'll create a variable temp, and we're going to set it to the current value of end, and then we're going to set end equal to start, and then start will be set equal to temp. Perfect. All right, now after our second if statement, we're going to go ahead and create a variable, const is in range, and we'll set this equal to a Boolean expression that checks if start is smaller than or equal to number, and is going to check if number is smaller than end. This double ampersand means that both this statement and this statement must both be true for is in range to be true. And then we'll simply return is in range. Okay, let's go ahead and save our code. And in step 10, let's go ahead and test it out. So we'll run node test inrange.js, all green. Perfect. Everything worked as we expected. Let's go ahead and clear our terminal, mark step 10 as complete, and we'll move on to our next method. This is the words method. I'm going to go ahead and comma separate our methods right now before I forget. Now let's talk about how the words method is supposed to work. The words method should take one argument, a string, and it's going to split that string into an array of words. And we're going to define a word by a space-separated string of characters. So each time we see a string, it's an empty space. If we look at the Lodash documentation, we'll notice that this function has a pattern parameter, but we're not going to introduce that complexity for now. In the next step, you're going to go ahead and ideate your approach to solving this problem. And again, we encourage you to use comments and pseudocode, even if you don't know exactly what to write. It'll help you with how to think through how to solve something logically. So in step 13, let's go ahead and implement a solution together. We're going to add a method, words, to our Lodash object. And it's going to take one parameter, string. And within the string, we're going to create a variable called words. And we're simply going to set its value to our string that's provided. And we're going to call the split method. And remember, we want to split on every empty space, meaning that a word is ended and a new word is beginning. Now we'll simply just return words, and we'll save our code. Mark step 13 is complete, and let's go ahead and test it in step 14. We'll run node test words.js. All green, perfect. And we'll move on to step 15. We're going to work on implementing the pad method. Now the pad method is going to take two arguments, a string and a length, and it's going to add padding evenly to both sides of the string to make it a desired length. Now if there's extra padding, meaning there's an odd amount, it'll be added to the end of the string. The official Lodash documentation has an additional cars parameter, but we're not going to implement that in our project. So after you've ideated approach on your own, we're going to go ahead and implement this together. We're going to create a method called pad, and it's going to take two arguments. It's going to take a string and a length. First thing we want to check and see is that if the length is shorter than or equal to the string. If it is, we're just going to return the string. So for instance, if the string is hi, but the length provided is 1, 1 is less than our string length of hi, which is 2 characters. So we would simply just return string. So we'll say if length is less than string.length, then we're simply going to return string. So now we're going to figure out the padding to go at the front of our string. So we're going to create a variable, start padding length, and we're going to set its value equal to the difference of length between the string's length divided by 2. And then because in the case of an odd number, we want to add the padding to the back of the string and not the front, we're going to round down with math.floor. So math.floor, and we're going to pass in the difference between length and string.length, and we're going to divide that by 2. So with that being our starting padding, we want to now get our ending padding. So we're going to create a variable, end padding length, and we're going to set its value to length minus our string's length minus our start padding length. Now with our padding size figured out, we're going to go ahead and add that padding to the front and back of our string. So we'll create a string, const padded string. This is what we'll eventually return. And we're going to add empty spaces to the front of our string. We can do this with the repeat method. And we want to repeat this start padding length many times. Then we'll concatenate that to our string. And then the same thing, we want to add an empty space as padding to the end of our string. So we'll call the repeat method on our empty space, and we want this to occur end padding length number of times. So finally, we're just going to return padded string. Let's save our code. And we'll go ahead and move on to step 18 and test our code. So we'll run node test pad.js. All greens. Perfect. Let's go ahead and clear our terminal. Mark step 18 is complete, and we'll go ahead and move on to step 19. In this next section, we're going to implement the has method, and we're going to do a slightly different version than the method in the Lodash library to save us some time. Here's the functionality that we expect for our has method. It's going to take two arguments, an object and a key, and it's going to check to see if the provided object contains a value at the specified key. If it does, then we're going to return true, and if it doesn't, we're simply going to return false. And as in the Lodash documentation, we don't need to accept the additional path parameter. We're only going to check for unnested values. All right, in the ideate section, this is an opportunity to compare how you are approaching to solve the problem with our approach. Now let's go ahead and implement this together. In step 21, let's go ahead and add our has method. And it's going to take two parameters, an object and a key. And remember, we're going to look to see if an object at a specific key has a value. So to do this, we'll create a variable has value, which we eventually are going to return. And we're going to set its value by checking if the object at a specific key is not equal to undefined. That means we did find a value for that specific key on an object. And then we'll simply just return has value. Great, let's save our code and move on to step 22, where we'll go ahead and test our code. Node test has.js. All greens. Perfect. Let's go ahead and mark step 22 as complete and move on to step 23. We're going to work on implementing the invert method. Let's talk about what we expect this method to do. It should take one argument, an object, and we're going to iterate through each key value pair in the provided object, and we're going to swap the key and value. So if the key is 1 and the value is a, then we'll swap it and the key will be a and the value is 1. And in the case of duplicate values in the object, subsequent values will overwrite property assignments of previous values. So in step 24, go ahead and compare how you attempted to think through how you might walk through this problem with the approach that we're suggesting. Okay, let's go ahead and implement this together in step 25. We're going to add our invert method, and it's going to take one parameter object, and within our method we're going to create a variable inverted object, and we'll set it equal to an empty object. This is the value that we'll eventually return. The next thing we're going to do is loop through the keys in our object. So to do that, we'll use a for in loop. Syntax is for, let key in object. And within that loop, we want to create a variable called original value. And we'll set it equal to the value of that specific key in our object. And so the next thing we want to do is take our inverted object, and we're going to use the original value variable that we just created, and we're going to set it equal to key. So we've just swapped our values and our keys. So outside this loop, we're simply going to return inverted object. Let's save our code. And in step 26, we'll go ahead and test our code. Run node test invert.js. All greens. Perfect. Okay, we'll mark step 26 as complete and move on to step 27. We're going to work on implementing the findKey method. So the findKey method is going to take two arguments, an object and a predicate function. And a predicate function is going to be a function that returns a Boolean value. So you'll need to keep that in mind. So findKey is going to iterate through each key value pair in a provided object. Now this is something that we've done recently. And it's going to return the first key that has a value that returns a truthy value from the predicate function. So the predicate function is going to receive a value from one of the keys. And if it returns a truthy value, then we're going to return that key. And then finally, if no values return truthy values from our predicate function, then we're simply going to return undefined. All right, so this one might have been a little bit trickier to work through. So hopefully you found our ideate step as a helpful resource to you to really help you get thinking about how you might approach this problem. Let's go ahead and implement the solution together. We'll comma separate our methods, and we'll add our findKey method. And it's going to take two parameters, object and predicate. We'll use predicate because the Lodash documentation uses this as well. Remember, it's just a function that's going to return a Boolean of true or false. Now within our method, we're going to use a for in loop to iterate through each key in our object. So for let key in object, and we're going to create a variable called value. And we'll go ahead and set it equal to the value at the current key in object. So we're going to look for the value on our object of our current key. Still within our for loop, we're going to create another variable, predicate return value. And this is going to be true or false. And we're going to set it equal to our predicate function that we've fed our value to. So remember, this predicate function is going to take a value and it's going to return either true or false. And this is looping through all the keys in our object. So in step 6, we're going to create an if statement, and it's going to check our predicate return value, and if it's truthy, then we're going to return the key, because that's our task, to return the first key that has a truthy value, because that's what our function does. It returns the key of the first value fed to our predicate function that's truthy. And then finally, outside of our loop, if none of our values passed into our predicate function were true, then we're just going to return undefined. Okay, let's save our code. And now let's test it out. We'll run node test find key.js and all greens. Perfect. Mark step 30 is complete and move on to our next method. Okay, the drop method is going to take 2 arguments. It's going to take an array and a number representing the number of items to drop from the beginning of an array. Our method will return a new array which contains the elements from the original array, excluding the specific number of elements from the beginning of the array. And if the number to drop is unspecified, then our method should just drop one element. In our ideate step, we give you some suggestions and a possible method that could really help you out in accomplishing. Now let's go ahead and implement this together in step 33. We'll comma separate our methods, and we'll add the drop method, and we'll pass in the 2 parameters, array, and then the number of elements that we want to drop. First, we're going to check and see if the number of elements to drop has been set. If it hasn't, we're going to set n to 1. So we'll create a conditional, and we're going to ask if n is equal to undefined, meaning that it hasn't been provided. If it is undefined, then we're going to set n equal to 1. Outside of our if statement, we're going to create a new variable, dropped array. And we're going to go ahead and set its value to a copy of the array, missing the first element by using the slice method. So on our array, we simply call the slice method and we pass in n. And then finally, we'll just return dropped array. All right, let's save our code. And let's test in step 34. We'll run node test drop.js and all greens. Perfect. Let's go ahead and clear our terminal. And we'll move on to step 25. This drop while method that we're going to implement is going to build on the drop method that we just created. It's going to take 2 arguments, an array and a predicate function. We've dealt with predicate functions before. They're a function that returns true or false based on the value provided to it. This predicate function is going to take 3 arguments, the current element index, and the whole array. Drop while will create a new copy of the supplied array, dropping elements from the beginning of the array until the element causes the predicate function to return a falsie. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example, because this could be a little bit hard to grasp. Our drop while method should be able to take an array, such as the one provided up here, an array of numbers 2, 4, 6, 3, and 7, and we're going to look at each value, and we're going to pass it to our predicate function. So if we pass in the number 2, we're going to look at this value. 2 is not equal to 6. 2 is not equal to 6. So this is true, so we're going to drop that element. Our next element, 4. 4 is not equal to 6, which is true, so we're going to drop that element. And then we get to the number 6. 6 is not equal to 6 is a false statement. Remember, our method works by dropping elements from the beginning of the array until an element causes the predicate function return falsie. It returns a false value. This means that 6, 3, and 7 become our array that's returned. Next in the ideate step, we provide you with some ways to think through solving this problem and a method to help you accomplish this. Let's go ahead and work on implementing the solution in step 37. We'll comma separate our values, and we're going to add our method drop while, and we're going to pass in 2 parameters of array and predicate. Now within this method, we're going to create a variable drop number, and we're going to set its value equal to the return value of a call to find index on array. So we'll say array.findIndex, And this is going to accept a callback function, which will take two arguments, element and index. Now within that callback function, we want to return the negated return of the predicate called with element, index, and array. So we'll return, and we want to return the negated return value. So we'll do exclamation mark, and then we call the predicate function, and we pass in element, index, and array. And remember, we negate the value since we're looking to drop elements until the predicate returns a falsy value. However, find index is looking for the first truthy value. So that's the logic of why we want to negate our return value. Now, after this drop number declaration, we're going to create a new variable, dropped array, and we'll go ahead and set its value to the return value of this.drop. And remember, drop is the method we created a short time ago, and we're able to reference it with this keyword. And we'll go ahead and pass in array and drop number. And then finally, we'll just go ahead and return dropped array. Perfect. Let's go ahead and save our code. And it's time to test it out in step 38. We'll say node test drop while JS, all greens. Perfect. We'll mark step 38 as complete. And then finally, we'll move on to our last method, the chunk method. This method will work by taking two arguments, an array and a size. This method will take our array and split it into smaller arrays of a specific size. Finally, it will return an array containing all the previously created array chunks in the order of the original array. Now, if the array can't be broken up evenly, the last chunk will be smaller than the specified size. And if no size is supplied to the method, the size will be set to 1. Alright, after you've ideated a game plan, let's go ahead and implement a solution together. We'll comma separate our methods, and we'll add our method chunk, and we'll pass in our two parameters of array and size. Now within our method, we're going to add an if statement, and we're going to see if size is undefined. If it is, we're going to set size equal to 1. Now after our if statement, then we're going to create a variable, array chunks, and we're going to initialize it to an empty array. This is the eventual value that we're going to return that we filled with all the mini chunks that we've created. Now let's go ahead and create a for loop because we want to loop through our array. We'll set let I equal to 0. As long as I is less than array.length, then we're going to increment I by the size of the chunk. So now we're going to go ahead and create a variable, array chunk, and these are going to be the chunks that we add to our array chunks that we're going to return at the end of this method. We'll set it equal to the chunk of the array going from the current loop index to the current loop index plus size. The slice method will help us with this. So we'll say array, then the slice method. We're going to go from the current index to the current index plus size. And now we simply want to push this chunk on to the end of our array chunks. So array chunks.push array chunk. Now outside of our for loop, we can go ahead and return our array chunks. Now let's save our code, and let's go ahead and test it out in step 42. Node test chunk.js, all greens. Perfect. Great job. Alright, congratulations, you did it. That was a marathon. This project was a great exercise in you developing problem-solving skills. Maybe for you, this is one of your first times using these problem-solving skills. It might not hurt to revisit this project again. Really develop those muscles. And for those of you who are able to come up with solutions on your own, and you want to keep on growing and developing this area, there are many more methods in the Lodash library, oftentimes with growing complexity, that you can really take to challenge yourself and grow as a developer. And this could also be a great opportunity for you to clean up your code. We recommend using the Google JavaScript style guidelines to help you do this. This way, whether you're revisiting your code or someone else is looking at your code with you, it really helps you stand out as a developer. So again, great job. This was a marathon. Congratulate yourself on how far you've come. You really deserve it. Take care and happy coding.